Asterisk, have you ever sat quietly in your favorite chair, maybe with a cup of tea, and thought about someone you used to talk to every day, but haven't heard from in months or even years? Maybe they were once your closest friend. Maybe you shared decades of memories, laughter, family milestones, and even heartbreaks. And now, it's just silence. It's a strange feeling, isn't it? Like something slipped away when you weren't looking. But you're not alone in feeling this. As we move into our 60s and beyond, many of us begin to notice something unsettling. The people we once felt closest to feel more like strangers. Conversations feel forced. Visits become rare. And we start wondering, is it them or is it me? The truth is, it's not really about blame. It's about change, and change is natural. Especially in this chapter of life, when so many things, our routines, health, energy, priorities are shifting beneath our feet. Friendships, even the oldest ones, don't always evolve with us, and that's where the distance begins. See, in our younger years, friendships were built on shared experiences, raising kids, navigating careers, living in the same neighborhood, or simply having the energy to go out often. But after 60, our needs shift. Our days look different. We may retire, lose a partner, move to a quieter place, or slow down physically. And as our lives change, sometimes we realize those friends we once held so dear are now walking very different paths. It's not that we stop caring, it's just that we're growing, yes, still growing even now. We might crave deeper conversations, more peace, or time with people who truly listen. And when our old friendships don't meet those needs anymore, it can feel like something's breaking inside. But let me say this, outgrowing friendships doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. In fact, it might mean you're becoming more in tune with who you are. Sometimes, the connection fades because we're no longer willing to put up with what we used to tolerate. Maybe a friend constantly complains, drains your energy, or dismisses your thoughts. In your 40s, you might have brushed it off. In your 60s, you realize your time is too precious for that. And that's not being cold, it's being honest with your soul. Other times, it's more subtle. A friend might have grown bitter, angry at the world, or stuck in the past. And every time you talk, you walk away feeling heavier instead of uplifted. You didn't choose to outgrow them. It just happened. Life stretched you in a different direction. And even though it hurts, it's okay. But the hardest part, it's when you still love someone deeply, yet you feel like they don't see you anymore, like the connection is hanging on by a thread, and you're the only one trying. That kind of emotional loneliness can sting far worse than being physically alone. Because it's not just the absence of company, it's the absence of being understood. Still, before we sink into sadness, let's take a breath. These moments, this reflection, it's not the end of your story. It's a turning point. Because once you recognize why this happens, you can begin to build new connections that match who you are now. You can protect your peace, set new boundaries, and still cherish the memories without carrying the weight of what no longer fits. And now that we've opened our hearts to the reality of this change, let's gently explore what else may be going on beneath the surface. One of the most surprising parts of aging is how quiet everything becomes, not just in your surroundings, but in your social world. You might still see names pop up on birthdays or the occasional family photo on social media, but that deep connection, that laughter that once came so easily, it starts to fade like an old photograph. And often, it's not due to one big argument or falling out. It's more like a slow drift. You change, they change. And before you know it, you're living in different, emotional landscapes. What once felt effortless now feels like work. And when friendship starts to feel like work, it quietly begins to fall apart. Let's be honest, after 60, our patience for surface-level small talk wears thin. We want depth. We want people who can sit with us in the silence, who can talk about real things, how we're coping, what we're learning, what we still dream about. We want someone who isn't afraid of talking about aging, loss, health, or even death. But not all of our old friends are ready to go there. Some stay, stuck in lighter conversations, in outdated banter, in pretending everything is fine when it's not. And that emotional mismatch slowly creates distance, even if no words are exchanged about it. Then there's the physical part. Our bodies change. We may not have the stamina to meet up regularly, travel, or keep up with fast-paced routines. Some friends remain constantly busy, always on the go, while others like you may crave slower mornings and meaningful chats over coffee. The energy no longer matches, and it's no one's fault, but it still leaves a void. Sometimes, health problems enter the picture, yours or theirs. When illness, surgeries, or memory issues become part of life, the friendship dynamic often shifts. One person might pull away because they don't know how to handle the vulnerability, or they might simply not be capable of showing up the way they used to. And even though you understand, it still leaves you grieving, not just for the friend, but for the version of life you used to share. Another shift happens when loss hits: loss of a spouse, a sibling, a home, a lifestyle. These kinds of losses can reshape who we are from the inside out. You might go through something life-changing and find that a lifelong friend offers nothing more than a casual that must be hard. And you think to yourself, they don't get it anymore. That's when it hits. You're not just outgrowing the friendship, you're becoming someone new, and they're not coming with you. But here's something important to remember. Outgrowing old friendships doesn't mean you're becoming lonelier. In many cases, it means you're making space for connections that finally meet you where you are emotionally, spiritually, and practically. It's like pruning a tree, painful in the moment, but necessary for new growth. And maybe, just maybe, part of why it hurts so much is because of the gratitude we feel toward those friendships. They were real, they mattered, they shaped us. But not all relationships are meant to last forever. Some are meant to walk beside us for a season, teach us something, and then gently fade into the background as we grow into new versions of ourselves. So if you're feeling the sting of distance right now, if you're sitting with a quiet phone and an aching heart, I want you to know, this isn't the end of your ability to connect. In fact, this might be the beginning of deeper, more meaningful relationships you never knew you needed. But first, we need to talk about something else that often gets overlooked when friendships fade. Ask ChatGPT. Sometimes the most painful part of growing apart from old friends is the guilt. That quiet, creeping voice that whispers, maybe you should have called more, or maybe you're being too picky. But here's the truth: there's nothing wrong with wanting your relationships to feel nourishing, especially at this stage of life. You're not the same person you were at 40 or even 55. And it's okay if your needs have changed. In fact, it's natural. What often doesn't get said out loud is this: after 60, our emotional bandwidth shrinks, not in a negative way, but in a protective one. We become more selective, more sensitive to where we place our energy. Time feels more sacred now. We stop chasing quantity and start craving quality. That shift alone is enough to stir up deep reflection about who we keep close. It's not just about who's still around, it's about who still sees you, who understands the version of you that exists now. Not the parent in full hustle mode, not the career-driven person, but the quieter, more reflective, perhaps even more spiritual version of yourself. The one who's more interested in meaning than momentum. And here's another subtle truth: some friendships survive because they never evolved. They stayed in the same stories, the same roles, the same patterns. But you've evolved. You've shed old skins. You've learned how to listen better, how to protect your peace, how to sit with discomfort. And not every friend took that journey with you. That gap, that difference in inner growth is often what drives the emotional distance, even when everything else on the outside looks fine. But let's talk about the ache, that quiet sadness that comes late at night, or when you scroll through old photos, or hear a song that reminds you of a friend you haven't seen in years. That ache is real, it's grief, and it deserves to be honored. Grieving a friendship isn't silly. It's a sign that you love deeply, that you invested in something meaningful, that you were open, loyal, and brave enough to connect. And even though the friendship may have changed or ended, it doesn't erase its value. You can still cherish the good times without clinging to a version of the relationship that no longer fits your life. So where do we go from here? We start by letting go of the pressure to maintain what no longer brings peace. We stop trying to resurrect every old connection just because it has history, and we begin making room for friendships that feel aligned with our pace, our values, and our emotional needs. It might look like meeting someone new at a book club, or finally opening up to a neighbor you've only ever waved to. It might be slower, gentler, less frequent, but far more fulfilling. Because real connection doesn't have an age limit. And sometimes, the most beautiful friendships begin later in life, when we're finally honest enough to say, "This is